Welcome to Beyond the Chutes is presented by Parasite Systems. I'm your host today, Doug Simcox. We are putting together what is called a short go, perfect sharing sizing, to share an episode, to share this episode wherever you're listening, whether it's Spotify or Apple Podcasts or RSS.com or our website, however you find it. Each episode has a little sharing button. While you're on your phone, you can click right on the sharing button. It'll give you some options. Do you want to share it on X? Do you want to share it on Facebook? Do you want to just copy the link? I like to copy the link. It's a little easier for me to move around. I simply copy, hit the button that copies. I then create a text to one of my friends, paste it into the text, hit send, do the same thing with an email if you'd like. We want to get this story out. This is interesting. Today's story is about 8 in a van. Now, I first became aware of this article, which was in the December-January 1980 championship issue. It's Tom Wood's picture. It was actually picture of the year for the Rodeo News. When I interviewed Tom Woods earlier this year, this came up, and I just love this picture. And the author of this story is Marty Martins, Wisconsin cowboy, college cowboy. His interview is going to be coming up here in a few weeks. As I said, he was Wisconsin, but he moved to Oklahoma, went to work for the Rodeo News as the managing editor. He was a competitor, bareback bronc rider. Gosh, he was in California, all over the place, up into the Dakotas. And then he became a rodeo announcer. And in this story, he is a rodeo announcer. He was already announcing rodeos, and he was still writing for the Rodeo News. And he needed a ride from Pauls Valley, his home, Oklahoma, to Dayton, Ohio, because he had to announce a rodeo. And 8 in a van is 8 cowboys in a van. And some points of interest in this article, I did a little research, and in 1975, Dodge van, which was probably the year that they were driving in 1979, sold for between about $3,500 and $5,500 based on how you set it up. Gas was about 60 cents per gallon then. The 1973 oil crisis had almost doubled the price of gas. Entry fees, we heard Mike Fletcher talk about it, were typically $20 per event. And you're going to hear us talk about prize money. And prize money is made up of 2 components: the cowboy entry fees and the added money, what the rodeo committee puts up for added money. So for an example, let's say we have 40 cowboys in an event, which was pretty typical in the bull riding and some of the other events. 40 cowboys with a $20 entry fee put $800 into the prize money pot. Added money back then could be $50 that the committee would put in, could be $150. Let's use $200 just to keep our math easy. So if we add the $800 to the $200, the added money, the total prize money would be about $1,000, or would be $1,000. If we had 40 entries, the IPRA or the IRA rulebook back then would have paid 6 places. First place would have paid about 29% of that pot, or $290. And I want to stop here because $290 in today's dollars, so $290 won in 1979 is worth about $1,500 today. We're going to hear that the van's take over this run was approximately $12,000, and $12,000 in 1979 with inflation, adjusted for inflation and the spending power and everything like that, is worth about $52,000 today. Now, how do you operate a van? How do you operate a truck? How does the crew work? I had a van back in 1990. A bunch of us traveled in, and we had what was called a kiddie, or the pot. And when each cowboy or each competitor crawled in, they put an equal amount into the pot. The truck was full of gas at that point. Let's say they put $20 in. This, in our truck, was used to primarily buy gas. If I need a quart of oil for the van, certainly that came out of that money. And a $160 pot, that'd be 8 cowboys putting $20 in the pot, back then in 1979 bought about 270 gallons of fuel. And that Dodge van they were running would get about 12 miles per gallon, a distance or a total range of about 3,200 miles. So when a cowboy gets out, let's say one cowboy jumps out, what we did, the van is refilled before he gets out, so the fuel is full. The pot is split out to the cowboys that are sitting in the van. Then the new pod is built based on how many cowboys are in the van that next time, and on it goes. So there's always an equal ability to account for the money, and it just kept any disagreements down. There were so many trucks or crews rodeoing then. You know, the 1973 gas crisis caused people to start to partner up. And as it went further, we heard Alan Coleman talk about how timed eventers started to invite rough stock riders into their trucks. Prior to that, in this era, this van that we're talking about, Rob McDonald's van, he had rough stock riders, bull riders, saddle bronc riders, and bareback riders. But there was timed event trucks or crews rodeoing going down the road at that point. Red Duffin had a crew, Jack Wiseman, Dale Yerrigan, Mike Swearingen. We've already talked about Alan Coleman. And here is Marty Martins, the writer of the story, giving us a bit of a setup. When you are writing for the Rodeo News, yep, and there's this great article that you wrote, I think it came out in December, January issue of the Rodeo News called 8 in a Van.
Yep.
Can you set that up? And I'm gonna read that here in just a minute. But can you just set this up for us? Take us back to 1979, the summer of 79, when you had this adventure.
Well, I've been on the rodeo circuit for a number of years, and then I was editor of Rodeo News magazine for 6 years, and then I became a rodeo announcer. I had a rodeo in Dayton, Iowa. I lived in Pauls Valley because that's where Rodeo News was, and so the Pauls Valley Rodeo was going on. I wasn't announcing it, but I was there watching. It was Thursday night performance, and Rob McDonald's crew was leaving to go to Dayton, and I found that out. And I said, "Well, listen, could I travel with you guys?" And they said, "Sure." So I got home. I had to get my suits and other stuff and my announcing hat. I wore a silver belly hat to announce it. So here's this rodeo announcer climbing into this van with eight guys, and well, actually there was seven of us for this trip. There was normally 8. But John Wilson was off in Wyoming or something for another rodeo at that time. But so we drove. And the one thing I remember about this trip, I don't know what kind of super duper engine or refrigeration unit that Rob had in this thing, but that maybe it helped him stay awake at night. But you could have hung meat in that thing. It was like a meat locker in that thing. So I guess with 7, 8 guys sleeping in the thing, you needed to kind of keep it cool. But it was freezing. I wish I wore a heavier jacket. But it was kind of unique the way these guys had it all figured out, how they switched places. They had some folding chairs in the back. They had some some bunks to sleep on or something like that. And they just all took turns rotating. Like every time he's out for gas, okay, everyone would rotate. It was just unspoken who was moving next or who moved up front and who drove and things like that. And so it was a really fun trip. What got me writing this story was because it was just really a hard time for rodeo. The prices were going up so bad on everything for the cowboys to go down the road, and gas was getting more expensive, and that was part of the way they were jamming together. Tom and I, we used to just the two of us in a truck, let's go out for a weekend. But now the guys are getting super cab pickups and things like that, just so they could help share expenses better. But so I wanted to write this article. I thought this was going to be really neat. It was Cowboy Christmas. Had these 8 guys who were doing all these rodeos, and I wanted to show how much it was going to cost them to go to all these different rodeos and how much they made, what the take was. And so now these are all top 15 bull riders and bronc riders, and bareback riders. So they were cashing in at most of these rodeos. So anyway, that's one of the things the story brings out is how expensive it was compared to what these guys laid out in their own money to go to all these rodeos. I forget how many different rodeos they went to. I think they made it to like 12 rodeos over that weekend.
Yep.
And even flying to California. One of the biggest compliments I had, one of my heroes in the rodeo circuit was Ron Martin. and he said he thought that was one of the best articles he ever read in Rodeo News. So
Oh, wow.
I that was high praise for me.
Yeah,
So,
you bet. Excellent, excellent. And a wonderful picture by Tom Woods.
oh yes, yeah, the guy, without a doubt, two-time rodeo photographer of the year, and great guy,
Yeah.
just a great guy to travel with too.
8 in a van. It wasn't all that long ago that cowboys used to travel together in twos, threes, and fours for the purpose of splitting travel expenses as well as for camaraderie. The rising cost of living on the road, especially for gasoline, has caused many of these traveling groups of crews to increase in number. Cowboys want to get home with at least a part of their winnings, as the amount of added money at the rodeos is fast outpaced by galloping inflation. One of the largest and more well-known crews on the rodeo trail is the one traveling in Rob McDonald's van. This article will illustrate the logistics necessary for a group of rodeo professionals to make the most rodeos possible at any given time, in this case, during a 16-day period from late June to early July. The crew is comprised of 1977 world champion bull rider Rob McDonald, two-time world champion bull rider Doyle Stanford, IFR 9 bronc riding champ John Wilson, current bareback leader Benny Jordan, IFR bull rider Ricky Stewart, and top 15 rigging stars Marlon Harris, Richard Yielding, and Jerry Easley. McDonald, Yielding, and Easley hail from Arkansas, while Stanford, Wilson, and Jordan live in Oklahoma. Stewart is from North Carolina and Harris from Florida. A cosmopolitan crew, but cowboys all. They travel in McDonald's Dodge van, a trustworthy vehicle that's logged over 300,000 miles, and it is armed with a CB radio, fuzzbuster, and stereo tape deck. A set of longhorns adorns the front of the otherwise unmarked rodeo wagon. Looking inside the van, you wonder how they managed to get all their gear in, much less 8 warm bodies. Just to the rear of the sliding side door is the front of a wall-to-wall bed that runs to the back of the van. Most of the gear and luggage is stored under the bunk. A rod spans the left side of the vehicle from behind the driver's seat back to the bunk. This rod is tightly packed with all the coats, shirts, and other hanging clothes. More gear is stowed against the wall under the clothes. 2 folding chairs are found on what remains of the floor space between the passenger's seat and bunk. Traveling arrangements find 1 person in each of the bucket seats, 2 or 3 on the chairs, and 4 or 5 sitting or reclining on the bed. It's tight, but surprisingly not at all uncomfortable, aided by the fact that an unspoken rotation goes on regularly between the choices and less desirable places. The journey begins the 3rd weekend of June in Gillette, Wyoming. Stewart isn't with them yet after an earlier injury. As is often the case with an octet of such capable athletes, the majority win or place here. The big winner is Yielding, who captures the bareback bronc riding with 73 points for $560 on Burns' IFR horse surprise package. Probably most memorable, though, is John Wilson taking first place in the bronc riding on Sensuous Woman, the first time the IFR bareback horse has ever been bucked under a saddle. He scores 75 to win $534. McDonald splits 2nd and 3rd in the bronc riding, and Jordan and Harris place in the bareback riding, as does Stanford in the bull riding. The crew divides further after Gillette as Wilson unloads his CAC and heads for California to rendezvous with his partners the following week. The rest of the crew heads southeast, where they start the 11-day 4th of July run on Thursday at Pauls Valley, Oklahoma, where Stewart rejoins the crew. McDonald wins the all-around title in Pauls Valley by winning money in the bronc riding and bull riding. easily splits first and second in the bareback riding, but Jordan's 64-point effort on Rice's number 10 fails to place, and the rest of the crew fare no better. Leaving PB, the crew brings their complement back up to 8 with the addition of a migrant announcer and head out for Dayton, Ohio, where they're up the following night. Some delays caused them to get there a half hour before the performance, although skin-to-the-teeth arrivals are nothing new for them. Haley and Link will eventually buck off over 40 bull riders at the Box 21 Rodeo, and they get McDonald and Sanford on opening night. But Stewart knocks a 72 out of Sneaky Snake to take the lead in the bull riding, as does Jordan in the horse riding with his 73 on number 50. The other rigging riders failed to scratch, and by Sunday night, Stewart and Jordan are moved to second place for $478 and $261, respectively. The following morning, the crew heads out for relatively close Evansville, Indiana. The bareback riders show greatly there, with Jordan taking first with 78 points on J. Bar J's day money, easily second, and Harris splitting third and fourth. McDonald wins the bronc riding and splits the last hole in the bull riding as easily captures the rookie bronc riding. After Evansville, the crew unloads McDonald, yielding Jordan and Stanford at the airport for the flight to the West Coast, and the remaining trio points the band towards Claremont, Indiana, for a Sunday afternoon performance. At Claremont, Harris wins the bareback riding with 74 points and easily also places. Stewart splits third and fourth in the bull riding. Since Dayton is having a Sunday night performance, the trio doubles back the couple-hour distance to be there for payday. Out in California, Wilson is hooked up with the rest of the crew to compete at Vista about the same time Claremont is going on. In the bronc riding, McDonald takes second and Wilson third. Jordan and Yielding split fourth in the bareback riding, and Stanford takes a fourth in the bull riding. That night, they have already reached the high desert for the second rodeo of the day at Hesperia. Jordan wins the bareback riding on Triangle Tees 5 with 75 points for $290, and Yielding takes a fourth. Stanford wins the bull riding on number 22 for $360, and McDonald places fifth. From there, they pushed for Northern California and the Folsom Rodeo the next day. At Folsom, McDonald wins the most with an 81-point ride for second place on Western's number 81 for $868. Wilson takes a third in the bronc riding for $365. The next stop is Salina, Utah, where Jordan wins the bareback riding on Misner's number 6. He scores 70 points for $266. Yielding scores a 69 on Yellow Fever for second and $200. McDonald picks up a third in the bronc riding and a four-way split for the last hole in the bull riding for some pocket change. From the Beehive State, the Western contingent flies back east and connects with the band crew at O'Hare in Chicago and compete at Plymouth, Wisconsin on Independence Day. There, Yielding and Harris split the bareback riding. Wilson takes second in the bronc riding, and Stanford rides Ladding Spider 100 for fourth. An overnight drive puts them in Oklahoma. At Hartshorn, Jordan and Harris come in 1 and 2 in the bareback riding, and McDonald takes a second in the bronc riding and squeaks in for some bull riding cash too. The following night at Edmond, Wilson takes first in the bronc riding for $235 and easily splits the rigging event for $324. Jordan and Stewart also place in their events. At Joplin, Missouri on the 7th, Stanford is king with his 77-point ride on Triple D's Blackjack for $443. McDonald's takes second in the bull riding, as does Easley in the bareback riding. Another long overnight haul back to the Great Lakes region gets them to Port Huron, Michigan for a Sunday afternoon show. Yielding makes a good 77-point ride on J. Bar J's Rocky J4 to win the bareback riding and $344. He's followed by Harris, who splits second and third. First and second in the bronc riding go to Wilson and McDonald in that order. McDonald and Stanford also place in the bull riding, and McDonald captures the versatility title there. In summary, the 8 stars of this story entered 104 events at 14 rodeos and won a total of $11,492. Following is a list of the Cowboys, their total winnings, how many times they entered, and their average earnings. McDonald, $2,639, 26 events entered, an average of $101, yielding $1,120, 13 events entered for an average of $86, easily $1,034, 10 events entered for an average of $103. Wilson, winnings of $1,605, 10 events entered for an average of $160. Jordan, $2,037 won, 13 events entered for an average of $156. Stewart, $646 won, 9 events entered for an average of $71. Harris, $1,140 won, 10 events entered for an average of $114. And Stanford, $1,273 won, 13 events entered for an average of $98. The Long Cowboys Christmas Run may not be the average travel tour made by professional rodeo cowboys, but it is indicative of the length, both in distance and in planning, full-time professionals will go to in order to stay on top. One can only imagine what they spend on plane tickets, gasoline, meals, and other expenses. This tale also illustrates how dependent the rodeo contestant is on the largesse of the rodeo sponsors. These rodeo cowboys paid entry fees at each rodeo and range from $25 to $40 for purses in each event from $125 to $450. As has been the case in the sport for many years, the Cowboys' own entry fees made up a large proportion of the total purse. It makes one wonder just how long the sport can survive with the athletes basically gambling for their own ante. We hope that you enjoyed this episode of our podcast about the Rodeo News article, 8 in a Van, written by Marty Martins. If you do, please share it with your friends. Word of mouth is always the best advertising. To make your listening easier, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. Like us, rate us, give us comments, let us hear from you. If you like reels, we got reels. Check out our Beyond the Chutes Facebook page and click follow. Thank you to Parasite Systems for their support with our podcast. They allow us to have so much fun and put out such interesting International Rodeo Association history out into the world. And they are a push-button parasitic diagnostic system for pasture animals, horses, cattle, goats, sheep, and chickens. And for your companion animals, your dogs and your cats. You can find them at Parasite, SIGHT, systems.com. And we got a coupon code that you can use for mail-in testing of your horses, your cattle, whatever it is, your dogs and your cats. It is BTC023. Get 50% off your mail-in testing. And gotta say, as we talk about this history, the history of the International Professional Rodeo Association, I listen to a lot of podcasts about a lot of subjects. We've talked about that, rodeo, racing, sports, politics, you name it. I listen to it. I want to encourage you to listen to a great rodeo podcast that's out there. Covers a lot of the International Professional Rodeo Association, covers into the PRCA a bit. It's called Rodeo Roots Podcast. Rob and Danigan and Blue Jeans, the rodeo announcer, are recording some great interviews. You can find them on all the major streaming platforms, so do check them out. Rodeo Roots Podcast. They're on Facebook as well. And speaking of Facebook, I want to say a big thank you to the IRA Project Facebook group for all their help and guidance. Mr. Tim Sparks, Mr. Marlon Harris, who's actually on his way by the time this episode comes out, on his way back from the 4 Sixes Remuda horse sale in Guthrie, Texas. They've really helped us connect with the rodeo greats of the IPRA and help us find articles like Edith Van. This is Beyond the Chutes with Doug Simcox. Until next time, thank you for listening.